I remember during that revival, so-called revival 15 years ago, a friend of mine went to one of those events, and she was there when people were falling down on the floor, writhing and yelling out and making wild noises. And she leaned over to somebody that was sitting next to her during this time, and she said, the only time you see this kind of behavior in the Bible is when a person is demon-possessed. Now, that's not a bad observation. But of course, immediately when she made that observation, she was, censured for grieving the Spirit or quenching the Spirit or putting God in a box. Listen, it is fair for us to ask of some bizarre thing whether or not that's legitimate, and it is no legitimate defense whatsoever to that thing to say, well, you can't put God in a box. Don't quench the Spirit. The thing that's at question is whether this is God or the Spirit to begin with. And those kind of responses just presume that you're wrong. That was a fair observation that was made by my friend. And apparently, in the case of Todd Bentley, not only does he have these kind of supernatural things going on, but I saw the video or the YouTube video myself where he talks about kicking people in the face, punching them in the stomach, body slamming them, because these were the things that the Holy Spirit told him to do. He said, there was that woman kneeling right in front of me with her arms raised, and the Holy Spirit said to me, kick her in the face. And so I obeyed. What? Kick her in the face, the Holy Spirit said again. So I reared back and put my foot right in her face, kicked her right over, something like that. Now, he's quite a showman. He's going through all these antics as he's explaining it, and everybody's cheering. Now, I think it's legitimate to ask whether that's really the Holy Spirit. And it doesn't do you any good to say, you can't put God in a box. Because once you say that, anything could be justified. And I remember back during that time, I thought of a bizarre illustration, set some people back on their heels. But what if somebody came to, what if I came to somebody and I said, we have a new movement of the Spirit in our church. Really, what is it? He says, when we all get together, the Holy Spirit falls upon us and we all urinate into a big pot in the middle of the room. What? Yeah, we all pee in a pot. We call it whizzing in the Spirit. They say, that's ridiculous. I say, wait, you can't put God in a box. See how that defense comes to my aid in something as silly as that? By the way, the liability of bringing up an illustration like that is somebody's going to hear me say that and say, hey, not a bad idea. Maybe that is God. That's lunacy. I think it's fair to ask the question here with regards to Todd Bentley, who's kicking people in the face, punching them in the stomach, and drop kicking them, giving them body slams. I think it's fair to ask the question here, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Here is the incarnate Son of God that was completely filled with the Holy Spirit every minute of his life. Can you countenance Jesus coming up to an old woman who's beseeching him for help and being led by the Spirit to kick her in the face? I mean, prima facie, on the face of it, this is weird. This is not Christ-like. And so I think just by that criterion itself, at least at that point, we have to reject Todd Bentley's conduct. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no action of God going on in his life. I don't know. And some people will say, well, look at the fruit. We've seen pictures. I've been there. And that's what a lot of people said in the responses here on this website. I've been there. I've seen it. All you critics, why don't you buy a ticket and go down to Lakeland, Florida? Come to the revival. Well, you don't have to actually go to a thing like that to be able to know whether it's legitimate or not. There are other things that you can test. The problem with these people is, this particular way of approaching that issue, is that they're saying if you just go and experience it, you'll know it's from God. But see, this is not the way revivals are assessed. Revivals aren't assessed by what happens inside of a church. People think revival is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit to do miraculous things and everybody gets goosebumps. They say, well, check the fruit. See the fruit? Everybody's praising God. You know, it's not that easy to check fruit. Because, you know, look, you could throw a piece of fruit in the bottom, a rotten fruit in the bottom of a barrel and put a bunch of other stuff on top, and you see the good stuff first, not knowing that there's something they're eating away, destroying from the inside out that fruit. A fruit checking is best done over a longer term than the moment that you're in the church looking at people raising their hands to God. There are all kinds of crazy things where people are raising their hands and having emotional experiences. The best test is what happens in the longer term. And the test is not what happens inside the doors of the church. The test is what happens outside the church tomorrow, next month, next year, or for years after that. You know, when you think about the Wesleyan revival in the 19th century, historians count the Wesleyan revival to be significant in the history of England because they consider that revival to have changed the culture so much that it saved England from the kind of civil war and revolution that you saw across the channel in France. You see, that was a real revival measured by the fruit that mattered. The durable changed lives, the transformed individuals that resulted in a transformed culture. Now that's revival. It's not what happens in some church in Lakeland, Florida. Bad fruit isn't evident immediately. Ultimately, we should never measure a revival by how much swooning goes on in the sanctuary, whether laughter, tears, howls, cheers. None of those things ultimately matter. The thing that matters is the long-term effect in changed lives that ultimately changes the culture. That's the measure.